I had lunch in San Francisco last Tuesday with a good friend, a native of the Bay Area. He's retired, but he's the kind of guy who walks out the door each day looking for a new adventure or a neighborhood to visit. He told me that he had just had a great morning. He was sitting at a table outside Farley's Coffee House on Potrero Hill in the city when a woman approached him and asked, "Don't I know you from somewhere?" He replied, "No, I don't think so, but my name is Richard. Nice to meet you." The woman smiled, went in, got her coffee, and then she did this rarest of things in our modern age. She asked if she could sit with him. He said, "Sure." And these two strangers proceeded to have a wonderful conversation for over an hour. She was an art therapist in her 60s and lived around the corner. At some point, she asked Richard if he was a member of the tribe, meaning she was Jewish and wondered if he was. And he said no, and that was that. They had such a good time that she gave him her email address and said, "If you're ever in the neighborhood and want to chat, let me know and I'll come down." Wow. I couldn't help but ask the obvious question. Was she weird? "No, that's just it," he exclaimed. "She was great." "Well, was she hitting on you? Did you mention your husband?" "I don't think she was, and my wedding ring is pretty obvious." "Wow," I marveled. "That's amazing. That never happens anymore." And I was a little jealous. Then I realized that I had been more willing to think that this woman had mental challenges or was coming on to my friend than to take her openness for what it was, an offer of friendship. Such are the times. Or maybe it's just me. "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," Jesus tells the inquiring lawyer in our gospel reading, echoing today's passage from Leviticus. I wondered later whether this woman might not have been trying to infuse some positivity into the world, some love of neighbor, to counteract all the horror of these past weeks of war in Gaza and Israel, along with all the rest of the awful mess we are constantly steeped in. Her actions were a good reminder that such connections can still happen. When I preached to you a few weeks ago, I encouraged you to reach out to Jewish or Muslim friends or places of worship to let them know you care and are praying for them. I had a chance to do that in person this past Wednesday at our Los Gatos Interfaith Clergy and Leaders meeting. 2 Muslim women were there whom I'd never met, Lubna and Tuba, and I made a point to introduce myself and welcome them. They were friendly, funny, and kind enough to laugh at my dumb jokes. I also spoke with Cantor Devora and Rabbi Hugh, 2 regulars in the group that I have come to regard as friends. I said, "I'm praying for you. It must be so hard. I get to walk away from this awfulness when I need to, but you lead a community that deals with it every waking hour." Devora agreed. What people don't understand is that for us, this war is not some abstract battle in a far-off land. Every Jew in America has family or friends in Israel, or we've been there and have close ties, or experience a connection and a love for it. So it's very close to home. I nodded in sympathy. I later wondered whether it might not be similar for Palestinians in America with ties there. That same day, a little later, I was in our monthly Zoom meeting with clergy of the diocese and our bishop. Halfway through it, we went into smaller breakout rooms to discuss how we're dealing with the war in Gaza in our church communities and in our preaching. I was hoping for some insights or suggestions, though frankly, past experience with my clergy colleagues has proven disappointing. We tend to clam up when it comes to being authentic or vulnerable with each other and our bishop, I am sorry to say. Sure enough, not much was shared, other than keep praying for peace, as important as that is. One priest did provide links to online resources that offer a balanced perspective on the situation. I mentioned contacting local leaders of Jewish and Muslim communities to offer support and prayers. Other than that, awkward silence. We Episcopal clergy are a genial but cautious bunch for the most part. Try as I might to resist, the war in Gaza has pulled at me all week long. I can't seem to get past it. I wouldn't say I'm doom scrolling on my phone, but maybe like some of you, I think I've been trying to find that article or image or story that will finally clarify everything about this mess and provide me with an unassailable moral perspective from which to view it all with certainty, dispense blame accordingly, and be done. But no such clear position exists. Unless, of course, you're able to view one group of people as less human than the other. Then I think you could pretend some moral high ground on which to stand. But you'd also be spitting in the face of God from that vantage point. The theme in this week's scriptures is, of course, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus insists that these are inextricably linked. The second command is like unto the first. Another way to put it, love your neighbor as yourself, is see and honor the humanity in your neighbor the way you would want your humanity to be seen and honored. How hard that is to do when people are being murdered by the thousands, held hostage, mutilated, bombed, especially when they are your friends, family, or fellow citizens. I never found that article that would explain it all with clarity, but I guess Nicholas Kristof came as close as any in the New York Times these last few weeks. He pointed out a truth so obvious, it's embarrassing that we have to be reminded of it and keep working at it. When you care about some humans but not others, you've lost your humanity. If you care about human life only in Israel or only in Gaza, then you don't actually care about humanity. If your moral compass is attuned to the suffering of only one side, your compass is broken, and so is your humanity. There is no hierarchy of human life. All lives are of equal value. For we who are not directly involved in this war, the message is the same. Really and truly, God sees us all as equally beloved. And if we fail to see each other that way, then at some level, we fail to love God. The second is like unto the first. In theory, seeing everyone as equally loved by God should be easy. In reality, it's nearly impossible. Because once you discover some trait or belief in another that differs significantly from yours, you diminish them in your heart accordingly. Or maybe it's just me. I didn't want to bring up Leviticus, our first reading, even though this is the only time in our entire 3-year church lectionary cycle when we will hear from that book. I didn't want to bring it up because, to my mind, one sentence in particular so bluntly condemns what is happening in Israel and Gaza right now that it leaves no room for the nuance this tragedy requires. And that sentence is this: You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. I am the Lord, meaning this is not up for discussion. I can't even take that charge from God and apply it to my own personal life of grudges and resentments, much less the mayhem in the Middle East. Instead, let me turn to another verse from Leviticus that we heard this morning, verse 16. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not profit by the blood of your neighbor. In a slightly different translation by the biblical scholar Robert Alter, that verse reads, you shall not go about slandering your kin. You shall not stand over the blood of your fellow man. Alter notes that standing over the blood indicates standing by without intervening while your fellow man's blood, literally or figuratively, is being spilled. In other words, when you do nothing in the face of tragedy, when you just stand there, you are complicit in the doing of harm. And so my message to you this morning, in all its obviousness and possibly futility, is do something. Pray for peace, sure, but be specific about it. Don't be shallow. Pray for parents whose baby has been slaughtered. Pray for Palestinians cowering in fear without water, food, fuel, or adequate health care. Pray for Israelis attending the funeral of their spouse or parent or child or friend. Picture each of them in your mind. Don't turn away. Keep informed. See both sides. I am not talking about Hamas here. And while I'm being bossy, let me just add, step out of your comfort zone at least once this week. Be like that woman who reached out to my friend on Potrero Hill and say something kind to a stranger. Start up a conversation without being weird about it. Donate to a place that alleviates suffering. Do a little volunteering. Email Shir Hadash Synagogue or the West Valley Muslim Association and tell them you care. Attend our Interfaith Thanksgiving service this year. Do something. Help tilt us all back a little towards goodness. I realize my words aren't that much better than the silence of my clergy colleagues, but please don't you be silent too. Recognize the humanity in everyone and speak through acts of compassion. So I feel like I should insert a little trigger warning here because this last bit gets a little graphic. I don't think it's too much. Maybe you might. And so I won't be hurt if you stop your ears. But I do think it's important. What I've tried to do in these last few days, I don't necessarily recommend to you. I have tried to find some bit of content from each side that unflinchingly depicts their suffering as a way of not turning away, so that I might have something or someone specific to pray for. I forced myself to read a short article in The Atlantic titled, "A Record of Pure Predatory Sadism," by Graham Wood. He writes, "This afternoon at a military base north of Tel Aviv, the Israeli Defense Forces held a grisly matinee screening of 43 minutes of raw footage from Hamas's October 7th attack. Members of the press were invited. The purpose was to show these journalists the atrocities committed by Hamas so they could truly understand what Israel was dealing with. The article then described a bit of the footage in graphic detail. It was gruesome. But for me, it was necessary to know so as to understand. Now, I cannot in good conscience share that with you, but I will say that the purest evil that I felt in that article was not violent, but casual. One Hamas member raiding the fridge of a family after having thrown a grenade into the room where they were hiding, more concerned about finding bottled water than by what he had just done. After showing all this footage to the press, one of the Israeli officials said, "What we shared with you, you should know it." Motaz Aziza is a photojournalist in Gaza who has been sending out remarkable, terrible images of the devastation there on his Instagram page. Photos of apartment buildings now rubble, videos of women and men screaming over loved ones now dead. The one that finally got to me was not overtly violent. In this video, Motaz is riding in a van, holding two little boys, about 1.5 and 2 years old. The 2-year-old is crying, dust covering his face. The other is eerily silent. Motaz tells us that they're driving away from a bombing that just occurred, and because he wears a vest that says press in English on it and was getting into a van, someone rushed up to him and thrust these two children into his arms and asked him to take them to safety. No names, no information. As he was speaking on the video, my eyes were riveted on the quiet little boy. Bright red blood covered one side of his head, but he made no sound. He just kept slowly staring around, slowly bobbing his head, blinking, mouth opening and closing, looking stunned, in shock, half conscious. As I watched this little 1.5-year-old boy, the thought came to me, this baby condemns us all. See and honor the humanity in your neighbor the way you would want yours to be seen and honored. Love your neighbor as yourself. When this same story, the love your neighbor story, comes up in Luke's gospel, the lawyer asks Jesus a follow-up question, and who is my neighbor? Jesus responds with the parable of the Good Samaritan and ends with a question back at the lawyer. Which of these three do you think, the priest, the Levite, or the Samaritan, was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise.